Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Winner W. I'm your host, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today. I have a wonderful treat for you guys because I had the opportunity to speak with the writer, director, and Sean Nichols Lynch, who wrote and directed the film Red Snow, which is a film that I had the opportunity to check out, but I wasn't sure what to expect, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. But to my genuine surprise, I was thoroughly entertained with this movie. So much so to the point where I will be buying the movie when it gets released on December 28th, later this month, on VOD and also on DVD. And I mean when I say that, I will be buying this movie, and I urge you all to do the same as well too. Also, be on the lookout for the interviews that I'll have for the stars of the movie, and Denise Cisneros and also Nico Bellamy, that will be available around the time this video gets uploaded too. And I'll also have the review for the film as well around the same time. So be on the lookout for that. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel, and while you're down there, share and like our videos and hit the notification bell. Now, without further ado, before we get into that interview with Sean, let's first check out the trailer for Red Snow.
Do you like vampires?
No, not really. Why?
I just noticed that you have a vampire book and vampire ornaments on your tree. You know, I've seen a gang of vamps rip a man's head off, then kick it round in a circle like a hacky sack.
Vampires aren't real.
Oh, yes, they are. And you know they are.
I got a chance to watch your film, Red Snow, and I'm going to start off by saying this here. When I saw the movie, I wasn't sure what to expect of it, to be completely honest. And when I saw it, I was genuinely surprised to see how fun the movie really was, and I really do mean that. One of the things you had pointed out before in a previous interview you had done, and I actually didn't notice until I watched it again the second time around, which was that I think you had initially had intended to want to give it this Hallmark feel to it for the film, but with a surprise, having the vampires pretty much crashing the party. So when I heard that, I went back to watch the film. I was like, oh, I get a sense of that there. But then you had mentioned before that your DP was pretty much very much against that. So you kind of had to meet in the middle to kind of be able to find a common ground for you guys to be able to take the approach with this movie. So I was actually genuinely surprised that I didn't notice that the first time around, but I did kind of get a sense of like something was a little, it looked, the shots, the way they were framed looked kind of rather familiar with that approach. So I thought that with what you were trying to go for with that film was, I think, one of the things that I found really unique about it, which I actually gravitated to, because it's not like a very typical vampire film where you have darkness pretty much oversaturating the film, but more or less just a lot of light and tone to it, but with some dark comedic elements that kind of creeps in along the way as well too. So I know you already mentioned before about what it was you had gone through to making the film. So I was actually really curious about when you had initially came up with the idea and then presented it to the people that to help make the movie there. Was it an easy sell for you to get that started along the way, for you to get them to be invested to want to go through with the production here?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. What's funny about this is a really small crew. This is like 10 or 11 people on the crew total. And we're all, it's a Christmas vampire movie that's mostly set in Olivia's cabin in Tahoe. We were living at that cabin and we were making this movie. I mean, plus a few other places in the Tahoe area. And so it's kind of like a lot of these people I'd worked with before. Gavin Murray, the cinematographer who you mentioned, like we went to San Francisco State together, we went to film school together. And so I think the tricky part of pitching this idea wasn't so much that it was kind of this crazy vampire, it's kind of like this genre mashing, but more just like the just like the comfort level, like I mean just making sure that people are okay being out in the cold, and like
Yeah.
that it would be kind of like going to camp, you know. I think that that was the bigger sell for people joining the movie. It's like it's going to be cold, you know, you can't go home at the end of the day. We're kind of like living on set. But you know what you get in exchange is like we'll you know, it's like a fun team, and we all got along really well, and we're pretty close throughout.
So you guys shot the movie, from what I understand, and I think I heard two different stories as far as how long the film was shot for. I think the first one I heard was around 12 days, and then I heard 3 weeks. So I wasn't sure if 3 weeks was part of the, I guess, consider the post production aspect of it, or I'm not sure if I understood what you meant by that length of shoot.
Yeah, so there was the first leg of the shoot was pre-COVID. It
Right.
was all in Tahoe. That was I mean, it was 12 shooting days over the course of 3 weeks sort of
Okay.
thing.
I got you.
And then we did some pickup, we did a pickup day later. And that
Post
was that,
COVID, right?
but yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
like during COVID. So that pretty much if you see the movie, there's a scene that's not in Tahoe, that's at a bookstore, and basically that scene and the scenes with Simon, that character, were done after the fact, and that was kind of always the plan. What we hadn't planned is that there would be a pandemic and it'd be really hard to
Yeah.
shoot that stuff. Like that was originally supposed to be a big crowd scene, but it sort of got scaled back because of COVID. Yeah.
So, and I understand too, considering that you guys, obviously you mentioned before that you had a very tight crew, but one of the things that I had learned along the way with your preparation for the film was you actually worked on setting up every shot so that way you guys can have a pretty smooth transition from one thing to the next. With some hiccups along the way that were brought up, especially when I heard you mention about Nicholas' character's lenses in the beginning of the film when we first kind of get introduced to him. That was being one of the major setbacks, but wasn't that much of a setback for you to begin with. But with that preparation you had set for the crew, that obviously made a huge impact in allowing you guys to move from one thing to the next. So considering that you guys had that 12-day shoot to get everything done, did you guys ever, well, at least for you, did you ever feel at any point that something could have just been taken, something could have just happened where all that would have been stalled for you, or were you guys pretty confident from day one all the way through day 12?
You know, as far as the things that were under our control, like shot listing the whole movie with Gavin, that was key. You know, planning out all the effect shots with Melanie, like it's all practical effects, all the
Right.
gore is practical. Like that stuff I felt really good about, and we were staying on schedule. You know, obviously 12 days is nothing. Like
Yeah.
my last feature had a 20-day shoot, and even that felt a little cramped. But the things that weren't in our control were mainly like the weather. I mean, snow
Right.
is in the title. Like there were days where we didn't have enough snow, there were days where we had too much. Like it was, we were kind of at the mercy of the elements. And because we were kind of, you know, working around the schedules of when the actors were in town, you know, Vernon Wells, who plays the vampire hunter Julius, he was in town for 2 days. We had him for 2 days, and like we had to get all of his shots. And luckily, like things just kind of worked out, like as far as the things that were out of our control. But I think that the only reason that was able to happen is we were on top of like everything else. Like we had planned everything that could be planned, and then, you know, just you know, when the elements didn't work out in our favor, we'd schedule things around, like we'd do interiors instead of exteriors, or vice versa, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
How did you, so you because I know I saw that Reverend was in the movie prior to me watching the film. How were you guys able to get him to be a part of the production? Because I understand that, you know, considering that this is an indie film, having his name on the marquee would certainly help out with the promotion of this movie. But having him involved, certainly he was really good in the film. But how were you able to convince him to take on the project, knowing that there's probably a good chance that he doesn't know who you are, and taking on a risk of that sort with a project that he, I'm not sure if that's something that you had to take some convincing, or was he just willing to be open to check out with whatever you were offering?
Yeah, I mean, well, you hit the nail on the head. Like
Okay.
that's what I tell every indie filmmaker, is like it really helps to get a veteran actor in there to like legitimize your project, like write a part with that person in mind, that you can sort of get them in and out without, you know, taking over much of their schedule. And you know, there's two ways for low budget movies to do that. You either do the cold call to their manager and just happen to see if they're interested in that. I had that work on my last movie, believe it or not.
Okay.
But this one is, I think, the better route, which is I contacted him through a friend, Brian Martin, who's a local filmmaker up here in Northern California. He's worked with Vernon a bunch of times. I happened to get in touch with Brian, and he offered to show him the script and kind of pitch it to him. So that helped. Like Brian, like totally helped us with that. And it was a challenge in the sense that I didn't meet Vernon until he was on set, so I didn't get to work with him the same way that I did the other actors.
Right.
But luckily, he showed up, and he's a total professional. He's got like hundreds of credits on his resume, so he showed up like ready to go, like in that character, and he was kind of like the right kind of flavor to add to the shoot at that time. Like it's sort of a morale booster to get a wild card like Vernon on set.
So when he showed up on set though, considering his resume that he had with the body work he has done throughout his career, was there anything that you probably could have, maybe you picked up along the way working with him that you realized, maybe the way that I intended on where this character, the way I was thinking in my mind, how I was going to want to approach it, he's doing it a lot better than I thought. Was it something along those lines that came along the way that you kind of picked up with working with him?
Oh, totally. And
Okay.
I mean, I think that it's the worst thing to do is to try and like over direct an actor
Yeah.
like that, because at the end of the day, he knows more than you do. Like he's been on more sets than you, and like I definitely like nudge, like he definitely played it a little bit bigger and a little bit crazier than what I had on the page, but that ended up being a flavor that worked really well in the movie. Just kind of playing it like this kind of like modern day Van Helsing. I think on the page that character is a little more grounded. Like certainly I was there to kind of like rein him in at times, like when he went a little too far in that direction. But like there's one line reading that he did that I just loved, that was like not on the page that way at all, where he's talking about the vampires, like on the script or on the page, it's just like, people think that vampires are cool, that they're sexy. And his line reading of it was like, think they're sexy. And just like he was playing it really big. And I was like, I was basically on set, I was like, Vernon, let's get one where you bring it down. And I did, and I got it the alternate way. I got like my version of it. But in the editing room, I was like, you know what, he was right. Like, in order to make Olivia uncomfortable, he kind of does need to like turn at that moment and become almost like a different person. And that's where I should have just trusted his instincts on the day, that's exactly what he was kind of going for. It's like at first he's kind of the friendly avuncular guy, but then it's like there's something darker and weirder underneath.
So when you were working with him on set, I mean, you had 2 days with him. Was that like in the beginning of the production, middle, the end? What was that schedule like?
That was towards the very end. Basically, like Denise and Nico were there the whole shoot. And basically midway is when we got like our villains. We got Laura Kennan, who plays Jackie, and we got Alan Silva, who plays Brock.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the middle of the shoot. And then the end was pretty much the rest of the scenes with Denise and Nico, and we added Vernon into the mix, since Vernon doesn't really have scenes with those other characters. And it worked out really well, like because we got a lot of the kind of easier stuff out of the way towards the beginning. I mean, a lot of interiors and that sort of stuff. And then we kind of did all the hardest stuff was like stunts and gore gags out in the woods with the other vampires. So it was kind of like this, like, it's like this hump that we got over. And then the stuff with Vernon was still challenging. I mean, there's still like effects work and that sort of thing, but it was kind of a nice like pace. And it was always kind of planned to do it that way, so that we, when we're like at the very beginning of the shoot, you're kind of like getting to know each other and get a rhythm going. And towards the middle is really the best time to get all the challenging stuff done.
So when you wrote the script and came up with the idea, and then again, I'm assuming that Vernon wasn't the person you initially thought of in writing the character here. It was just something along those lines where you wanted someone to play that Donald Pleasance type character, or but considering that your friend, you said it was Brian, right? That knows Vernon, having him mentioning Vernon's name, was that something like, oh, I didn't think of that? Was it kind of along those lines, or did it kind of trickle along the way we thought of who I can possibly consider looking into for this part?
Yeah, I you know, there's kind of that list of like cult movie actors that I was always kind of thinking of, you know, and they're kind of all over the map. You know, you think of Danny Trejo, you think of Tony Todd, you think of all those guys, and you know, it's once Vernon was brought up, I was like, oh, that makes a ton of sense. Like he kind of has that kind of like gravitas that this part needs. You know, we had you know, I can't say that I wrote it for him specifically, like I did some of the other roles, but yeah, he really fit in there and really made it his own. And I think the movie is much stronger having him in it in that role.
You know, it's funny. When I first saw him, and when you first get introduced to him, like the thing that I actually appreciate about his performance was that you mentioned before that he has a little bit of that over the topness in certain sequences, but when you first get introduced to him, it's very subtle, very relaxing. You don't expect that from it until the conversation progresses. But you know, it's funny because I never once felt as if though it was out of place. It's what's one of the things about Vernon that I think a lot of people may not realize who don't know him outside of like Road Warrior or Commando, you know, those major Hollywood films. But when you actually take the time to look at him and see what he's done, whether the projects be large or small, he's actually a strong actor. And considering what he's been able to pull off with this film, honestly, I kind of forgot, not to say that I never respect him as an actor, but I just kind of forgot, like, this guy is actually very capable of really showcasing a lot of strengths in areas that I'm probably not very familiar with him because I haven't seen all of his films. So considering with what he's been able to pull off here in this movie, one thing I always hope that people will take in consideration is that that whenever they bring in an actor of that sort who has years of experience and in bringing in a new, that sense of like what's the word I want to use, like of like not what's the word I want to use, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is that they bring a sense of like of not authority but just this gravitas behind about them. But in you having new people who are starting off in, I guess, in the beginning of their career, and having that balance to bring out the freshness with the old, if you will, and bringing that mix of both to work very well along with one another. And I think that worked very effectively in this movie too, considering that he's only in it for a good part of it, but even when he's not in it, the film still carries on without him, which is another strength of the movie as well too, considering that you had written a very strong script. So this brings me to the next thing I want to talk about, which is the two main actors in the film, both of which being your friends, Denise Cisneros and Nico Bellamy, who are the two leads in this film. I know that you're friends with them and you had gone to school with Denise in college, and then you've known Nico for quite some time. I think I heard you mention before too that you actually worked with his brother in a previous project as well too.
Ben.
Considering that you were trying to get Nico at one point but just never panned out, and this being the one opportunity where you actually thought of him for the part and it actually worked out. So when you were initially writing the roles for them, did you have to go back and forth with them to say, hey, this is my idea of what I want to do with the characters for you? Any input, or did you already know exactly what you had in mind for them and then trusted that they will be able to carry that in the performances?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I definitely molded those characters around them, and then was like pretty open to feedback to kind of, you know, and they had all kinds of questions for me, like kind of like in the case of Denise, it's sort of like, you know, just backstory on her character. And I kind of invited her to kind of work on that with me, just kind of a lot of the context that you don't see in the movie, like her relationship with her sister and all that. But yeah, I think especially with Denise, like that sense of humor and like that kind of performance was exactly, I mean, it was kind of like, you know, it was, I knew that I wanted Denise to play that role, so I very much wrote it to her like kind of comedic timing and her you know, that presence that she brings. But yeah, I think that they definitely brought a lot of their own to it as well.
So Denise is her character in the movie. You know what's interesting? I think I remember reading like one of the I guess those little lines that they pull out for one of the reviews was as misery meets I forget what the other line was that was trying to describe the movie. And I was
Lost
wondering,
Boys is one that
that's
comes
the one
up sometimes. Yeah.
So when I saw her performance in the movie, she definitely has this like innocence about her, where she's obviously down in love. For those that don't know the overall plot of the film, essentially your Denise's character is a struggling a vampire book writer who is trying to get her books out for a publisher to take over and hopefully sell her novels, but it's not getting anywhere with that. Then meets a real vampire along the way that pretty much just changes the trajectory of the story that she wanted to go for, which I kind of want to get into a little bit here. But her performance, though, What I actually appreciated about her was that there was a sense of like innocence about her, but then you can kind of clearly tell there's a little, I don't know if it's the best way to describe it, but in a way, it's like the cheese kind of fell off the cracker, if you will, in certain moments where you realize, like, okay, something's not going. Is she fully? I mean, does she have a thing for the guy? I mean, she does, and is it legitimate? And there's, without really getting into spoilers, but there's certain things that occur along the way that you understand where she's coming from, but then certain turn of events has occurred to change her personality, or maybe it was already there in the first place, but it just kind of opened the floodgates, if you will. So I'm imagining that you've been able to see her being able to pull it off in other areas, and as far as acting is concerned, considering what you have seen from her school. So were you at any point considering that with the amount of I guess wavelengths of emotion this character would be going through, that if she was going to be able to pull it off, or secondly, if she's going to be able to do something different than what you had imagined for her to do, especially when you're working on set? Like, did you give her freedom to be able to make those adjustments herself while you guys were shooting, or was it all just preparation, do it like this and stick with that?
Oh no, like I mean, so much of that is just Denise.
Okay.
Because a lot, I mean, so much of the stuff that I had worked with her on, I mean, I never got to direct her when I was in school, but a lot of the material that she was drawn to was kind of this dark, very dark comedy, like this, like gallows humor type stuff, where she would play these characters with sort of an edge. And that's really what like drew me to her as an actress, is like she was willing to go to these places and for it to still be funny. I mean, in a very dark way. And these were like conversations that we had a lot in the lead up to it, but because the character was so much built around her, and because she was kind of able to fill in a lot of the gaps of the character, it was it was kind of a dream working with her, because a lot of the direction on set wasn't so much like mining into the character, is more just like blocking, it's like molding the performance to the camera placement and the camera movement, and more of those kinds of things. And and Denise would have questions for me, and we'd talk on set, but a lot of the heavy legwork was done in pre-production and development, which is great because we had 12 days to shoot the movie and we needed to move fast.
Did you give chances for the actors to kind of take on like improvisation, to be able to do something different from what was written on the page, and have an opportunity for them to be able to try something new altogether while working, if the opportunity presented itself?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, Vernon brought in a lot of that. Like he would like to ad lib and add little touches there, and sometimes it worked, and sometimes I'd say let's try with what was on the page. But I know Nico has a lot of like little ticks and things that he adds that I was generally very fond of, like like licking the blood off his fingers. That's a total Nico thing, and those little touches. Or or in the case of Denise, like some of those expressions that she'd make, like I would not tell her to make these like maniacal grins and things. And that's just something that she sort of felt in the moment would work, and it totally did. Like it very much fit the character, and kind of hinted at this dark side that we see later in the movie, which is what I really liked about Denise's characterization.
So now moving on to Nico here. So his performance, it was someone that, because I'm not familiar with who he was prior to this film, but considering with what he had done, there's what I get from him is that, I mean, apart from him kind of playing the comedy, but in a very what's the word I want to use?
Like
not making
understated.
Really pretty controlled for the most part, but it's still that borderline where he's playing along with the beats, but whereas Denise, on the other hand, is kind of like all over the place to some extent. So with him, though, one thing that I really did appreciate with his role was that, we get moments of him being a pretty genuine person, where he's really appreciative of what Denise or her character is doing for him. But at the same time, you can clearly see he's still very much struggling with his urges, if you will, of him through dealing with his hunger, considering that she's been feeding him pig blood at that point. So, when you had him on set, I think you've answered my question here about what he was able to provide as far as improvisation is concerned, with little ticks here and there. Was there anything else that you were? Well, actually, no, let me go back here. There was a lot of things I actually did pick up on that you had shared before in previous interviews, where you had mentioned that some things that you were presented as an issue on during the production, especially when it came to one of the scenes where one of these guys were literally had their heads ripped off, and the way the blood was supposed to come out didn't really work out as well as you intended. And Nick was like, well, try this instead, where you can just pump all the blood in the head and let it drip down on my face. So obviously he's very good at adapting and improvising something on the spot, which really helped out in your favor, which actually made that particular scene much more impactful. So having him on the set and working off those scenes clearly worked out in your favor. So I'm assuming that while you were working with him, that I get the feeling you may have known that he was able to do what was necessary, but probably were surprised along the way with what he was able to come up with to help carry the scene and make it better from what you initially had thought it would be on the page.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, filmmaking is a team sport, and you need other creators, other creative people. I first met Nico as a filmmaker and as a screenwriter. Acting. I didn't know that he was also an actor until later. And until I met him at an audition for one of my projects. And I think the fact that he has that background and is able to sort of think creatively and like on the spot, especially if, during these long nights where it's 30 degrees and a lot of us, you work slowly in cold temperatures, and combined with being tired, like sometimes you just don't think of the most obvious solution, and that was like brilliant in the moment. Like just to give extra context, what you're talking about is that moment when the head rip happens. There is supposed to be like a geyser of blood that shoots out of the neck, which was working, but then he's supposed to lift up the head and like all this blood is supposed to come down, but the apparatus inside the head, it wasn't really working, like it wasn't showering, so it would just kind of look silly, like he is holding it up and nothing would happen. And so he just held it over that hose so it just like sponge up all this blood.
Right.
And then that was the shot we used in the movie. We had one take of that because we were just like up against the wall, and it looks amazing.
So and that's not the first time he had blood pretty much drenched on him. There's another scene where he has that happen to him as well too. So I'm gonna be talking to him and Denise later this week, but I was curious if to get your perspective on it. So having the all that blood drench him like that, how hard is it to clean that off? Because I would imagine it's because I know it's incredibly sticky, and if it sits on you after a while, it's incredibly difficult to have that removed. So knowing that was going to be the case there, were you guys also prepared for having to deal with that after the fact to get that removed in a timely manner, considering the short time you guys had?
Yeah, I mean, we were always pretty close to our base camp, which was the actual cabin. And what we would do is we would like line out paths of like cardboard leading to from where the blood letting was happening directly to where the shower is. So he was we would wrap him up, and in the case, the worst one was actually when he's inside the garage and the blood is all over him, like that, in terms of just how uncomfortable, like, because that was so much blood and he was freezing cold. So we just wrapped him and got him to the hot shower like as quickly as possible. Because and another thing about that blood is it's cold, like it's not hot like real blood. So he was a real trooper on that. Like no one got harder than Nico. I mean, between having to be naked and covered in blood, and like he was really put through the ringer on this movie, having to climb over that Christmas tree that he later got a rash from because it's a fake tree.
Oh really?
Yeah, he really went through the ringer, but he never complained about it. And again, like another good reason to work with your friends is
so I mean, for the most part, you guys had a pretty good experience in making the movie, considering the amount of time you guys have, obviously the preparation you had in setting up the shots and be able to move things pretty smoothly. So overall, though, your experience in making the film, working with everybody, turned out to for the most part, I would imagine, pretty positive experience. Considering certain hurdles that came along the way, but you're still able to overcome that. So, I mean, to me, it sounds very rare that certain hurdles that come along the way would actually, you guys were able to overcome on the spot, considering that you guys have a tight budget. So at any point, did you ever feel like when you were making the film, like, oh man, this is not going to work out. What are we going to do right now? Had it not been for Nico or anybody else kind of chiming in to give their input to help move things along?
I mean, It's never easy. Like it's I don't want to make it sound like this is an easy shoot, but I think that we all, you know, I try to make sure that everyone felt like they had a voice at the table, you know, like and I think that that's kind of what got us out of a few jams. Because I don't have the answer to every problem. You know, like there were moments where we had to literally like shovel snow into the shot to make our day, you know, or just do crazy outside the box things. And part of that was we were not using digital effects as a crutch. Like we couldn't say we'll fix it in post, because like, you know, we didn't have money for CGI, and we didn't really want CGI because at this budget level it rarely looks good. I think like the only digital effects in the movie are just like wire removal on a couple shots. And so, yeah, I mean, to answer your question, like, there were definitely like moments where I knew that we would figure it out. But I think the thing that worried me the most was how little time we had. And that's why when I shot listed the movie with Gavin, we would kind of think about shots in terms of, because I was editing the movie too, I was thinking, these are the shots I absolutely need to make the edit work. These are the shots, usually like insert shots, like close-up of a business card, close-up of a bite, like those little things. These are like nice to have. And then there's kind of the fancier, more elaborate shots that take more time to set up, that were more like, you know, this would, if we have extra time, like it'd be great to get this stuff. Like that category was kind of like, you know, close-ups of the ornaments on the tree, and like some of the crazier shots that we got out in the woods with Alan chasing Denise. Like that was a day, I mean, that sequence was one where I actually got to get everything on my list. It was just like a really hard day because of that, you know. But yeah.
So you mentioned before, because I actually remember hearing that you had edited the film. So were you editing the movie during production as well, or was it all done after you guys had finished shooting the film?
It was all done after. I honestly did not have time to do anything like that. Like I'm sure, I mean, I would look at dailies and things to get a sense of where we were and if things were working, and I felt really good about what I saw. But basically from the moment I would wake up to the moment I went to sleep, I was working. You know, there was very little downtime during the day for me to actually like get into an edit, and even if there was time for me to do that, I think like the last thing I'd want to do is I feel like I'd need to recharge my batteries. Like we played like a lot of board games at the cabin and that sort of thing to kind of recharge and that sort of stuff. So yeah, what was kind of funny is like I got back from this shoot, we were kind of in our own little quarantine, and just like hearing about COVID for the first time, like like through the news. And when I got back is when all the lockdowns happened, and it was kind of the perfect time to be in post on a movie, because all I did was just like hunker down and edit like nonstop.
So how long did it take for you to edit the film to get it to its final form as it is right now? How long did it take from the moment you stopped working on the set and to where we are with it now?
It was the better part of a year, because my process is always like I do a rough cut, then I screen that rough cut to people. This was a little bit different because of COVID. I ended up just sending out private links to, you know, a lot of people that I trust and people that worked on the movie, and they basically had an anonymous Google survey where they could like send feedback or things that didn't work or things they're confused about. Then I would go into my second cut, reach the final cut, and then we bring in like the sound mixer, that was Steve and Melissa, and then the colorist Liz, who kind of like bring it to its final stage. And you know, you brought up the Hallmark movie thing, like just to speak to that further, like that was another conversation that I had with the colorist, was like, hey, you know, I know that right now it's very fashionable, especially like things like Hereditary, you know, which I love, but it's very fashionable for things to be underlit, to have kind of this really like rotting flesh color palette, like this kind of grayish color palette. And I was very insistent, like I want the opposite of that. I want this to be a bright, crazy, colorful movie. Because this is the aesthetic, like this was always the plan, for it to have this aesthetic, and it's gonna alienate a lot of people, but the people that like get what we're doing will be totally into it. And Liz was on board with that too, and even she convinced me to go darker on some stuff. Like again, like people were definitely reining me in on this vampires take over a Hallmark Channel movie idea, but probably for the best. Well, I mean, still got to also work as a horror movie in addition to this weird mashup.
Would you ever consider doing a film of that's another horror film, at least with that Hallmark aesthetic to it, but have some of the, I guess the uninvited guests, if you will, to kind of just crash a party. So are you kind of consider doing that down the line if given the opportunity, or were you just trying to attempt it with this film since it only worked out to a certain point? Are you and seeing the end results and having everyone put their input? Are you content with what you have seen so far and feel like, you know what, it was probably for the best, I never went down that route?
Yeah, it's, never say never. I think every project is different and kind of requires a different look. Like, this is my second feature. My first feature looks nothing like this movie. It's a much darker, kind of moodier looking movie. I mean, it probably looks more like a conventional horror movie than this movie does. But I think, it's honestly like I try and not just default to a look for a movie. I try and really think like, what would be the look that would best serve this material? Like, rather than going straight for let's have it look like Hereditary, let's have it super underlit. Like, think about like, does that work for this tone and this mood? And for this, like, I mean, honestly, like on my next one, I probably would want to get away from this look just because I've been, we shot this in early 2020 and I've been looking at footage that looks like this nonstop for a long time. So I would kind of want to mix it up, but I'm not afraid to dip a toe in this again. I feel like it could be pushed further. I mean, I'd also have to talk to Gavin about it if he would want to try something this bold again.
Right.
But I'm really happy with the way that it looks, and I dig it when people, kind of get that that's the vibe for this one.
What was the initial runtime? Because right now the film is sitting at, I think, an hour and 20 minutes, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So for you, I mean, so when you had edited the film prior to its final cut, what was it? What was the longest that the film was at its one of the initial edits?
It was similar. It was definitely longer, but it was still under 90 minutes.
Okay.
But that rough cut is always a little flabby. Like, it's always a little like things, I mean, I don't know, like for some reason, there's certain parts where I could just tell even before I got the feedback, like, we need to get through this moment. Like, it's usually during some of the longer dialogue scenes, like, when Denise is in the car talking to Simon, Edward does a great job with that character, but a lot of that scene ended up getting cut just because the vibe was kind of like, okay, we've introduced the threat of the vampires. We want to get back to that. Like, we don't want to spend too much time on this conversation. We kind of want to, we want to see Denise get back to the cabin and fight those vampires. So like, it was kind of like trimming things down to as tight as they can be. And I kind of always knew that I wanted it around 80 to 85 because I wanted this to move pretty quickly and to be, even though it's a pretty like dialogue heavy movie, I didn't want it to feel like it was dragged down. I wanted to kind of to move pretty quickly. I mean, we have a vampire attack in the first minute. The bat hits the window very early on and then turns into a vampire very quickly. And then we introduce Vernon. Like, I wanted it to have that kind of rapid feel to it, and I think that that's what emerged in the final cut was just mostly just pacing issues and having it as like tight as possible.
It's funny because you mentioned it's a very heavily dialogue film for the most, which is true. The first thing pops in mind is imagine like Aaron Sorkin meets vampires in a way. But one thing I actually want to give you props for is I'm not sure if people have brought this up more often, is that I think the film when it comes to the dialogue with the characters, that's actually one of the biggest strengths for the film, in my opinion. Of course, the actors delivering the parts obviously helped out as well too. So a lot of credit to them as well. But the dialogue was one of the things that really intrigued me about the movie the most as well, because when you're hearing Luke, played by Nico, who was talking about Romania and how Denise's character wanted to have her story take place in Romania because the vampires are dark and gloomy. He's like, that is the most boring place in the world. It sucks out there. No vampire. Like little things like that. Like they kind of give it that pop for her to be aware of what vampires are going through. So there's obviously that self-awareness that they have in the film, which kind of which I think was a perfect balance of like bringing back to what the realities were within the story, but at the same time kind of poking fun at it as well too. So I thought that was balanced out pretty well. And with having her kind of react to that, like, no, I want to like this. and still being very much resistant to that. It's odd because I'm not sure, I don't know if you picked up on this here, but hearing the stories that where you're talking about how you wanted the film to have a certain look and you're kind of getting resistance on that. That's kind of like what she's kind of going through as well too, where people are like, no, it's a terrible idea to do it like this instead. No, I want to do it like this. So I'm kind of seeing a little parallels between the two of you in that regard. So I'm not sure if you picked up on that along the way too, and seeing that.
Oh yeah. I totally relate to, Olivia isn't me. I'm very different than that character, but there's definitely like elements like, the frustrated artist thing is something I totally get, and dealing like with the rejection and all of that, like all of that being like trying to pursue like the arts as a living. Like that's me. I totally get that. And and I think that the key with that story though is like it's when Olivia learns to kind of compromise and like take feedback with a real vampire. Like that's kind of when she becomes successful in a way. And and that's kind of true, I think, in any art form, is like it's kind of an isolating thing, especially writing. Like you write by yourself and you're very like protective of this thing, and it's only when you show it to other people and kind of hear their honest feedback that you can kind of let things grow. And I think that's why it's good when I get pushback on these things, because I think that that Gavin was able to rein me in on the look of the movie. Like, believe it or not, it was going to be even more like in that direction before he was like, well, we want this to look good though, right? So, and I think that's all just like a valid part of the creative process.
So now with that, with the way, with the film being done and you're out there promoting it, and I know you've gone to a few festivals where you had shown the film, and from what I understand too, you seem to get a lot of positive reaction from people who have seen the film at these festivals. So the reaction you're hearing from people, are you, were you a little surprised? Were you kind of nervous about what the reaction was going to be from, not hearing from people you've worked with or friends and family that you may have shown us here before, the world, if you will, but hearing from everyone else? Like, what was that thought process for you, and then going through that up to this point now?
Yeah, at this point we've played over 15 festivals, and they've all been genre festivals. They've all been like horror crowds, and so that's been really great, because that's kind of the target audience, is like horror fans, because horror fans, they've seen everything. Like they've seen every, I don't need to tell you, it's like every version of vampires, they've seen it done before. So they're looking for something new, something kind of different, something that excites them about this subgenre again. And I think that was one of the things that I sort of set out to do, is like, I've never really seen a successful version of vampires plus Christmas horror, combined with this sort of misery element that we were talking about earlier, like the following like a writer. And so like people have been super positive about that. I imagine once it's out on VOD and DVD, like, I think it'll be a little more polarizing, especially because, if you go in expecting, a straight down the middle horror movie, you're probably not going to get that kind of movie, and you might be disappointed, and that's fine. Like, this is a very specific kind of, we wanted to really swing for the fences and make something really bold and different. And I think that so the festival audiences have loved that about it. It'll be interesting to see once it's available to the world, like how it goes down. I could see it going either way. I could see people loving it, I could see people hating it, but that was kind of always going to be the case with a story like this. That's kind of wild.
Well, it caught me by surprise, and I mean that when I say that, because considering as we meant, you kind of touched upon before, that the vampire genre is a very oversaturated market, where everything and anything has been done with that particular genre, where it's a hit and miss. You're either going to do something that's going to be bold and it's going to work, or it doesn't work, or it's going to be bold, may not catch on right now, but it will catch on eventually. So for me, what I do hope would happen with your film would be that people will take notice of it right away, and then eventually share it and spread the word. Because I really did enjoy the film quite a lot, actually. I really did. So for anyone that doesn't know, the film, as of this recording, the film will be released on VOD and DVD on the 28th of December, which I thought was a little odd considering it's a Christmas movie, but they're releasing after the fact, which I know you mentioned before. The distributors thought that it was probably best to do it to not compete with other Christmas films that are coming out. So
they know better than I. But it's funny because overseas they got it in time for Christmas, but I'm heartened by the fact that I watch Black Christmas any time of the year.
Yeah.
I these are things that I revisit throughout the year, and next Christmas people will already be well aware of it, I hope.
Yeah.
If like you said, word of mouth gets around, because that's how little movies build a fan base, is by one friend telling another friend, etc.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wish it came out before Christmas, but it'll be in time for New Year's at least. It'll still be a winter horror. Yeah.
Start the year with a Christmas vampire film. That's interesting. I love that. All right. Well, so I know we're going to be nearing the time here, but so is there anything that you want to point out here too that maybe we didn't touch upon during the conversation, or anything else you want people to be on the lookout for as far as any upcoming projects that you are able to indulge here with us, but for us to be on the lookout for?
I right now I'm writing the next thing, and that's a process that takes a while. But the next thing will definitely be another horror movie. Like, this is my genre, this is what I love. And again, I think my hope is that the I'll take the lessons from this one and be able to reunite with a lot of these same team members, and make another thing that's just kind of like a little bit different than we're used to seeing. Probably not vampires, but we'll see. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I really do look forward to seeing what that project's going to be. After watching this film, I meant to say, I think that what you have done and everyone that's involved in making this film have done a really good job. And I really do mean that. So considering what you're going to be doing down the line, hopefully that'll come to fruition really, really soon. So I'll be on the lookout for that as well. So I'll do my absolute best to help promote this movie as well. Once this video gets uploaded, we'll have everything out there, and make sure I have all the social media links for the film, yourself as well too, so people can be on the lookout for that as well. Any final words before you want to say before we sign off here?
No, man, just thanks for having me on, and nerds rule the world, man.
I appreciate that. All right, well, listen, you have yourself a wonderful day. Thanks again for taking the time out of your day to speak with us here, and or speak with me, I meant to say, but you enjoy yourself out there, and be safe as well.
You're cool. Thanks, Robert. Cheers.